8 women living in South Bend board a passenger train in Racine, Wisconsin. They're bound for Chicago, and even though they won't acknowledge it to one another, they're each nervous. They think they shouldn't be. After all, they're professional athletes, 8 members of the South Bend Blue Sox, and by the end of June 1943, they'd had dozens of contests and plenty of road trips under their belts. The women are tired, coming off a 12-6 victory against the Racine Bells the night before. It was a sloppy contest, played in awful weather that contributed to 17 errors between the two teams. But a win was a win, and as the 8 players stepped off of the train in Chicago, their South Bend Blue Sox sat atop the league standings. These are the best players on the best team in their sport, and the women know that. They try in vain to persuade themselves that this is just another road trip, just another game, and just another ballpark. But as the train clacks along the track and the city comes into view, they can't help but fidget in their seats. This isn't just another road trip, and they're not in Rockford or Kenosha or Racine. This is Chicago, a roaring city filled with more than 3 million people and ambitious skyscrapers that seem to touch the clouds. It's not just another game either. This is the All-Star Game, the first one in the young history of the Women's League. The 8 Blue Sox players selected to the squad are Mary Bonnie Baker, Margaret Sonny Berger, Doris Dodie Barr, Johanna Joe Hageman, Margaret Marge Stefani, Lois Flash Florike, Betsy Sock'em Jock'em, and Josephine JoJo D'Angelo. There are more than 10,000 spectators in the stands. The night before, the Blue Sox had played in front of 683 fans at a ballpark in Racine. But this wasn't that ball field. And it wasn't just any ball field either. This was Wrigley Field. And the All-Stars were about to play the first night game in the history of that baseball sanctuary. The weight of the moment was not lost on any of them. The umpire lifted his mask for just a moment and shouted 2 words: "Play ball." Hello and welcome to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. I'm your host, Aaron Hellman, and during this series, we are going to dive into the history of the South Bend Blue Sox, possibly the most storied franchise in the brief but shining history of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. During the course of this episode, you'll hear fictional advertisements for very real historical companies and products. We do that to help break up the podcast, provide some levity, to include just a little more history than we could otherwise, and to give you a sense of the time and place when and where all of this is happening. The absence of actual paid advertising is made possible by the generous underwriting of the entire series by the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League Players Association. And now, with all that out of the way, let's jump into the very first season of the South Bend Blue Sox, and let's follow the squad through their ups, their downs, and the way they were embraced by the new city they called home. The Blue Sox got off to a great start in that first season, sweeping an opening day doubleheader, but by the end of that first day of the season, the first bit of attrition hit the squad. Geraldine Shafranis had gone 0 for 9 across the 2 games. And afterward, she packed up her stuff and went back to her home in Chicago. She never played another professional game. The next day, they took the first game of another doubleheader, marking 3 straight wins to start the season. They dropped the second game of that double feature before losing the series finale a day later. But after 3 days, the Blue Sox were 3-2, and more importantly, they were a hit in South Bend. On June 2nd, South Bend's Lois Florike, a 16-year-old third baseman from Missouri, made history when she bashed the first home run for the Blue Sox and the first home run in the history of the league. It had taken just 3 days for local sports writers to cast aside their skepticism, and maybe there wasn't a better compliment to the newly formed Women's League than that the newspaper covered their exploits the same way they would cover any other sport. The game looked a lot like baseball, except that the pitchers threw underhand, the baselines were shorter, and the skirts were shorter still. The South Bend Tribune did not treat the league like a novelty. It lauded their efforts, criticized their mistakes, bemoaned their losses, and cheered their victories. But for the rest of the first week of the season, there wouldn't be any victories to cheer. The team's 3-game winning streak gave way to a 4-game losing streak. The Blue Sox managed to snap their skid with a 9-3 victory against Racine, bringing their record to 4-4. The season was just 6 days old. They'd played 8 games during those 6 days, and 3 of them had gone to extra innings. The Blue Sox, and all of the teams in the league, played a grueling schedule. A series was usually 5 games, a doubleheader on day 1, another doubleheader on day 2, then a single contest on day 3, followed by a Midwestern train ride to the next town, where the same pattern would be repeated all over again. Besides that, teams practiced 7 days a week, meaning that there were plenty of days that started with a 3 or 4 hour practice, followed by a doubleheader, followed by a cramped Midwestern train ride. Fortunately, the women loved the game, and as for the ones who didn't, they wouldn't last long. Besides Stefanis, 5 more of the players on that inaugural Blue Sox squad would opt out of the league by the end of 1943. Given that teams kept just 15 players on their rosters, and that teams with 3 decent pitchers were the lucky ones, you've got a recipe for fatigue, exhaustion, and injury. All of those misfortunes would visit the Blue Sox during the first month of the season, and then there would be the unexpected misfortunes too. The South Bend Blue Sox did not have an equipment manager, which meant that players were on their own to keep their uniforms clean and game ready. Laundry was just another chore that would need to be squeezed in before and after games, especially since the team had been issued exactly 1 uniform per player. Sam Force, the business manager for the team, even made the trip into Chicago to lobby Philip Wrigley to issue a second set of uniforms. Eventually, Force won the argument. The Blue Sox quickly established an identity as a team built around pitching and defense. 2 weeks into the season, they were last in the league's batting statistics, but still carried the best record, courtesy of the work they did in the other half of the inning. By June 22nd, the Blue Sox were 18-11, and they were the only team in the league with a winning record. Attendance at the games was growing as the summer lingered on. 1,000 fans one night, 1,200 a week later, 1,400 a week after that. South Bend's Betsy Jochum was an early star, and the city embraced her and her teammates almost immediately. "What I do remember," she said, "everyone treated us royally. I don't remember anyone ever booing us in South Bend or any other town." But that didn't mean that there weren't hostilities out on the diamond, and a month into the campaign, the grind of the long season was about to take a toll. Tempers ran short as summer temperatures soared. Players and managers got mouthy with umpires and got ejected with an alarming frequency. Maybe it was the only way they could get themselves a break. Injuries mounted. South Bend shortstop Dottie Schroeder missed 2 weeks when her ankle was gashed by a player wearing illegal spikes. She needed 20 stitches to close the wound. Pitchers threw with dead arms, and in a league that valued the stolen base, catchers wore out their arms too, trying to snipe would-be base stealers. South Bend's Loris Florike was KO'd during a collision on the base paths, but managed to stay in the game after they revived her. The Tribune described the incident this way: Lois Floreyk, who runs the bases and guards third base for the Blue Sox as though she had been trained for the job by working out against tough Notre Dame linemen, nearly landed in the hospital again last night. As the article implies, it wasn't her first run-in with the injury bug. A few weeks earlier, she'd hurt an ankle sliding hard into home. After being whisked away to the hospital for x-rays, it was determined just to be a sprain, and Floreyk was back on the diamond a few days later. Anyway, injuries weren't a problem unique to the Blue Sox. Every team in the league had injuries and attrition thanks to the grueling schedule, and now the league had a problem because just 3 weeks into the season, quality of play was beginning to suffer. The Blue Sox won a 19-6 game against Racine when the Racine team ran out of arms and had no choice but to leave an inexperienced pitcher on the mound who would go on to walk 20 across 7 innings. When a team sensed that a catcher was too tired to throw, they'd run wild, racking up stolen bases by the dozen. At the end of a long series, players made more errors. It was around this time that Philip Wrigley and his associates decided to change the name of the league. The rough-and-tumble nature of this new game represented something much closer to baseball than even he'd expected. What had started as the All-American Girls Professional Softball League was now the All-American Girls Baseball League. The AAGPSL had become the AAGBBL. And as the clock wound down on the first month of the season, the South Bend Blue Sox sat at the top of the AAGBBL. They were 22-17 heading into the All-Star break. The players selected to that illustrious squad were thrilled for the honor, and the ones left off the roster were probably just happy to get a day off. We'll get into that All-Star game right after the break.
Attention customers of the Dainty Maid Bake Shop at 123 North Michigan Street in downtown South Bend. Due to a nationwide shortage in sugar, the Dainty Maid Bake Shop will be closed for 1 week, beginning July 4th and ending July 12th. We're doing our part for Uncle Sam during the war. Are you? And now, back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
Philip Wrigley wanted the first All-Star game in his new league to be a spectacle, and he knew exactly how to achieve it. He worked with contractors to bring temporary lights into his ballpark, Wrigley Field in Chicago. It would be the first night game in the long history of the storied stadium, and there wouldn't be another one for more than 40 years. Wrigley did not charge admission for the game, and as the fans poured through the turnstiles, the buzz in the ballpark really started to hum. It wasn't Bendix Field back in South Bend, but for the Blue Sox on the diamond, it might have sounded like it. The team's public address announcer, Joe Boland, came along with the team and was on the Wrigley Field mic for the duration of the game. Boland was already a local legend, having played for the 1924 National Championship Notre Dame football team under Knute Rockne, then serving as the Irish line coach from 1934 to 1940. After that, Boland became something of a legendary sportscaster. He was the first voice of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, called a few NFL games, and yes, he served as the public address announcer for the South Bend Blue Sox. Boland Drive is named in his honor. So that first All-Star game had a distinctly South Bend flavor, but the results weren't so good for the 8 ladies from South Bend. They were paired with the All-Stars from Rockford and got run over by the opposing team 16-0. The South Bend Rockford squad only managed 2 hits. And then, it was back onto another train to Racine. For the 8 South Benders on that first All-Star game, there was the matter of a series to wrap up with the Bells. These next few games would go a long way toward determining who won the first half of the season and who would secure an automatic playoff spot. Tensions were hot. The Racine Bells were just 1 game back of the Blue Sox with a week left in the first half of the season. More importantly, the team still had these two games with one another. The Blue Sox lost them both and skittered for the remainder of the week. After spending most of the season in first place, the South Bend squad floundered and finished the first half of the season at 28-26. Good enough for second place, but second place was good for nothing. There would be no time to sulk. There was still the second half of a long season, and there were still 54 games left to play. If South Bend could win the second half, they'd have an opportunity to exact their vengeance against the Racine Bells in the playoffs. They had the players, they had the talent, and they had the support of South Bend. All they had to do now was get healthy, and that last part was going to prove to be the challenge. Since the 1943 Blue Sox were built around pitching and defense, that made the season an awfully heavy lift for its top hurlers. Sonny Berger, a 21-year-old out of Miami, and Dodie Barr, a 22-year-old southpaw out of Winnipeg. As went their fortunes, so went the teams, and when the grind of back-to-back-to-back doubleheaders took a toll on their arms, the Blue Sox were destined to struggle. The Blue Sox spent the entire season trying to identify a third pitcher who could spell either of those first two. They'd started the year with Muriel Coben, a 22-year-old from Saskatoon, Canada, who was considered the greatest pitcher that region had ever seen. Coben's skills did not translate to the new league, and she struggled mightily during her one and only season in the States. She was waived by South Bend and picked up by Rockford, but finished 1943 with a 4-16 record and allowed more runs than any other pitcher in the league. For a while, they tried out Ruth Bourne, who admitted she was in over her head. Betty Mac McFadden suffered a similar fate. They made a trade later in the year for Kay Bennett, a pitcher from the Kenosha Comets, but Bennett struggled the same way everyone else did. The Blue Sox were a streaky, hot and cold team throughout the season. They won games when their pitchers were good and struggled to score enough runs to rescue them when they weren't. They would go as far as their pitchers could take them and last as long as their pitchers' arms did. The team received a bit of a morale boost in late July when Chicago Cubs third baseman Stan Hack made the trip to South Bend to spectate a Blue Sox game. Hack met with some of the players and told the press that he was a fan and supporter of the women's game. Unfortunately for Hack, and for the Blue Sox, he came on a day when neither Berger nor Barr were able to pitch, and the Blue Sox dropped the contest. But when they weren't playing, the players were beginning to feel more at home in South Bend. They favored a West Side establishment called the Black Cat and were commonly seen at the Philadelphia buying candy and ice cream. 2 months into the existence of the league, the players were bona fide celebrities, and the newspaper covered the most mundane details of their lives. Catcher Bonnie Baker's favorite soda is Coca-Cola. Marge Stefani likes reading mystery novels. Some of the players like to ride bikes. Others enjoy sandwiches. But for the women themselves, their focus was on what was happening on the field, because after all, they were professional athletes, and they were making $50 a week at it. At the end of July, the team's second-half record hovered right at .500, but there was still one more month to go. The push for the playoffs was about to begin, and more than anything else, it would be a march of attrition. We'll follow the season down the stretch, right after the break.
Attention! Due to higher costs under new federal market order, the Milk Council of South Bend of Mishawaka is forced to increase its prices. Beginning now, all dairy products, except butter and eggs, will be subject to price increases of 1/2 cent to 1 cent. Thank you for your support of our boys overseas. And now, back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
The month of August started out on a high note. A record crowd of 1,923 raucous fans piled into Bendix Field to watch their Blue Sox sweep a doubleheader against Kenosha and move into first place in the second half league standings. The triumphant women from South Bend hit the showers and then boarded a train for a 9-game road trip that would go a long way toward determining the playoffs. The trip was kissed by rain, and while a pair of consecutive rainouts might have brought a temporary respite for the weary team, it didn't bode well for the future. The missed contests were rescheduled as 2 more doubleheaders packed into an August schedule that was already filled with them. Manager Bert Niehoff leaned harder than ever on his twin aces, Barr and Berger. During a doubleheader on August 5th, Berger was called on in relief of Barr in Game 1, logging a 6-out save to secure victory before pitching a complete game in the nightcap, another Blue Sox win. Neither pitcher was available for the doubleheader the next day, and South Bend dropped both ends of the twin bill, falling out of first place. It went on like this for a while. The Blue Sox won their next 2 games behind Berger and Barr to reclaim the league lead, then relinquished that lead again on days when Barr and Berger couldn't pitch. But in the midst of it all, the Blue Sox only grew more popular in town. On August 9th, they hosted 2,186 fans at Bendix Field, and the team announced that they would be renting and installing more bleachers as the playoff run became more intense. A day later, the team won another thriller, a 1-0, 11-inning contest. Sonny Berger pitched all 11 of those innings and allowed only 4 hits. With 3 weeks to go, the Blue Sox had a 2-game lead in the standings. When they swept another doubleheader on August 12th in front of another record crowd, their lead swelled. The Blue Sox were on their way, but the win came at a great cost. Bonnie Baker, all-star catcher for the Blue Sox, broke her hand and would miss the rest of the season. Baker was not only one of the best catchers in the league, she was one of its best hitters, and she was the heart and soul of her team. Without their leader, the offense went cold. On August 15th, Doris Barr tossed 9 innings of 2-hit ball against the Rockford Peaches, but she was bested by the opposing pitcher, Olive Ali Little, who tossed a masterpiece, a no-hitter, to down the Blue Sox. But with a 4-game series against the second-place Kenosha Comets coming up in South Bend, the Blue Sox were still in control of their own destiny. They lost all 4. The Blue Sox managed just 5 runs in those 4 games and wasted pitching gems by Barr and Berger along the way. A record crowd of 2,463 turned out for the last game of the series and the last home game of the season to watch the Blue Sox blow a 2-1 lead in the 9th inning. Niehoff brought Berger in to try to save the game for the home team, her 3rd night in a row taking the mound and her 15th inning in 3 days. The toll finally caught up to her when she allowed the fateful rally and took the loss. The season was over at Bendix Field, unless the Blue Sox could sneak into the playoffs. They were going to give it their best shot. Coming off of their 4-game sweep at the hands of Kenosha, South Bend headed into Rockford, and Rockford would prove to be very hostile territory indeed, and not in a metaphorical way. Their first day in Rockford came with boos and jeers from a raucous crowd. When the umpire ejected the Peaches shortstop, their fans littered the field with soda bottles, and the Blue Sox were left to run for cover. Still, the South Benders won both games and reclaimed first place for themselves. The next day was even worse. When the Rockford manager disagreed with a call, fans stormed the field, and police rushed into the fray to protect the umpires from the riotous mob. But the Blue Sox left with a win thanks to a late rally and an emergency relief appearance from Sonny Berger, who was supposed to have the day off. The Blue Sox had become popular enough in South Bend that the Tribune opened a tip line for fans wanting to follow the progress of the team's away games. Callers could dial the Tribune sports department any time during the game to get live score updates. South Bend loved their Blue Sox, and the Blue Sox were doing their best to give the home fans a home playoff game. Now it was time for a 5-game series at Kenosha, and the opportunity to avenge the disappointment of a few weeks earlier. The first game of the series was a rainout, setting the teams up for a doubleheader the next day. The doubleheader was a disaster for South Bend. They dropped the games 9-0 and 8-1. Even worse, it had been Berger and Barr who'd taken the hill for both contests. The women would never admit it, but they were running on empty, and there were still 8 games to go in the season. South Bend would need just about all 8 of them. Sonny Berger did everything she could to deliver the Blue Sox into the postseason, including pitching heroically in both halves of the closing doubleheader in Kenosha. She allowed just 2 runs during those 2 games, and the Blue Sox only managed to win one of them. The Blue Sox were still alive headed into the last day of the season, but their season would end with a whimper when they dropped both halves of a doubleheader to the Racine Bells, while the Kenosha Comets won both halves of their twin bill at Rockford. South Bend's collapse was complete. They'd dropped 12 of their last 19 games. The championship series was set, and the South Bend Blue Sox were not in it. It was a quirk of the schedule, but over the course of the season, the South Bend Blue Sox actually finished with the second-best record in the league. But because they hadn't been the best team during either half of the season, they were left on the outside looking in. The players returned to South Bend, packed their things, and headed back for their homes across the United States and Canada. 11 of the 15 players on the roster would return the following year. But for as much disappointment as accompanied that first season, it was a success, at least in South Bend. The team had found a home, it had fallen in love with its fans, and its fans had loved them back. The Racine Bells won that championship series over the Kenosha Comets, and the exploits of the series were covered in the paper. But when the season wrapped up, the people of South Bend were given another gift. The announcement that the South Bend Blue Sox would return the following year, and the long winter would be made just a little bit easier with the knowledge that come the spring, baseball would be back, and there would be something to cheer for again. Hey, thanks for joining us on A Bend in Time presented by the History Museum in South Bend. There's more history waiting for you at historymuseumsb.org. And if you want to know anything else about the All-American League, the History Museum should be your first stop. The History Museum serves as the national repository for the AAGPBL Players Association. I'm your host, Aaron Hellman. The theme music is Whose Distance Is It Anyway by Neil Carmichael. Tune in for our next episode as we follow the Blue Sox through the evolution of the league. They'll change some rules, start pitching sidearm and then finally overhand. Teams will change and move, but the South Bend Blue Sox will be there the whole time. I hope you'll tune in as we continue their journey. And remember, everything is fascinating as long as you stay curious.